Live on a Friday night. Here we are. It's His Eminence Terence Cardinal Rayo and his left.
No, wait a minute. I thought His Eminence was
No, it
Terence
was
Cardinal
Tenet.
Fitzgerald.
Yes, no, it's Terence Cardinal Fitzgerald. Absolutely.
Yeah.
In honor of Brian Fitzgerald, our colleague or former colleague. Yes, that's what I used to call him. Only because that goes back to when I was in grammar school. I had in fourth grade at St. Philip and James in the Bronx.
Right.
I had Sister Anthony. Okay, so right there, that should tell you that there's an issue here. All right. So Sister Anthony, as it turned out, had taught. What? What's the matter? We're not going to talk about Sister Charles Edwards now. No, but Sister
Anthony. I thought it was Sister Charles Edwards.
Sister Anthony. Well, that you and I have had that conversation about it. That is the best nuns, one of the best nuns' names ever, because you can visualize that. You don't mess with Sister Charles Edwards. No. While she was a nun by day, and then she did CBS Radio by night as Douglas Edwards.
You could tell it's a Friday night, folks.
Yes, Joe Rayo and Joe Chaffee here. No, but Sister Anthony taught Terence Cardinal Cook. Well, he became Cardinal Cook in New York,
right.
And she actually went to his ordination as when he was made a cardinal in Rome, which we jumped for joy because she was away for 4 weeks. It was, she was a tough customer.
I could imagine.
The only nun that could that would stand above Sister Anthony was Sister Germaine.
Germaine.
Okay. Now Sister Germaine was.
Hold on for a second. Hold on. I gotta mute that. I turned on the YouTube channel so I could watch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the volume up.
It runs about a minute behind, unfortunately.
Sister Germaine, when I went to grammar school, was already 80 years old. And if someone if someone laid odds, I would take odds that she may still be living. Okay. She had a right hook like you would not believe. And oddly enough, she sent us. I'll never forget when she hit a right Michael Edwards with a right cross.
I would wonder, and of course, you and I have now been away from Catholic schools for many.
Yeah, they don't have old nuns anymore.
They don't have no. or treat the students sometimes like with corporal punishment.
No. That's long gone. But I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something. The world would be a much better place if there were more old nuns around. Okay,
yeah.
Especially if you go to church now, where people don't even think twice about picking up their cell phones during a first communion or a confirmation, and I could just I would see this stuff happening and think, this is where a very old nun would be walking down the aisles and confiscating all these phones, and everybody would just that would be that. You would just do it.
They give you the icy stare.
Yes.
And you knew you were in trouble.
Yes, exactly. So I sent you. And it's going to be up for Patreon members, but I didn't schedule that post until 9:00. But I did put the link up in the chat board for those of you who are on tonight, and we've got a very nice crowd. Oh, Delvin is on. Oh my, I haven't seen you here in a while. But it's a link that has a lot of New York history on it, and it has New York weather history on it. The thing is, I went to post it on Facebook, and I instantly got this window I actually went to post it on Messenger, and when I tried to send it to Joe, and I instantly got this message that said, this is labeled as an abusive link. See, only I put up weather links that are labeled abusive, pornography, and all this other nonsense. And just, Facebook has done it again. Anyhow.
It's amazing. It really is. A friend of mine, in fact, one of our regular watchers, Dennis Cassia, there's There's a honeymooners Facebook page, and once I think Dennis wanted to use a quote from one of the honeymooners. It was uttered by Alice Cramden's sister when she ran away from her husband on the first day of their wedding, and she declared, "All men are beasts." Well, Dennis put that quote on the honeymooner site, or tried to, and I think he was immediately suspended for
Oh
like.
yeah. There's a few stories. I'm not kidding. Somebody I know. I don't. And I really would love to see how this got triggered. But they got put into Facebook jail for putting up a recipe for chicken parm. I don't know what it what it said, if there was any kind of connotation to it, but it was essentially a recipe for chicken parm.
You
And
better you better
uh,
watch out because we may
this
get.
is what happens because social media is run by teenagers in booster seats, and some of them I wouldn't be surprised if they're still in diapers. But no matter. Anyway, Scott Briller gave me this link, the chairman. I don't know if Scott's on tonight because he's got stuff going on in his life with his mom, so we wish them both well. And also one of our regulars, Lisa Marie Nieves, who's on most nights. She's going through a difficult time right now, so we extend hope and prayers to her. She gets through her tough time, and well, with respect to the link that Scott put up, because right now we would be coming to the end 1718. Of course, you had the 100 years, the record, the coldest New Year's we were talking about back a few days ago, and was it 2 years ago? We had the second coldest, correct?
Right,
Okay,
right.
so that was that a period 100 years ago was a 4 day stretch where temperatures in New York City were below zero for however many days in a row. I think it was four. And we often wonder, how that happened and whether it could happen again. But what struck me reading through on this website, where he's got each decade through the 1960s, each decade. Uh, and by the way, that website is called. You know what? I'll give it to you, everybody, at the end because I got the page set up at a certain spot, and I don't want to have to go looking for it again. But the, uh, the decade of the night. I was reading through some of the stuff in the 19 teens, and the thing that struck me, Joe, was the fact that uh, the more things change, the more they don't. And I'll give you just as an example. So, well, first thing that struck me was March 1st, 1914. Okay. Rain in the morning, changed to snow. This is for New York City now. So rain in the morning, changed to snow around lunchtime. By midnight, 13 and a half inches accumulated. And then an additional inch fell after midnight on the 2nd. This was March 1st, 1914. It was very heavy, wet snow, 2.65 inches of liquid. So the water content was huge. Of course, you had the rain first. So how much of that was rain and how much was snow, we don't know. And it was the century's first the new century's first 1 foot snowstorm, first snowstorm of a foot or more, and the first since February of 1899. So that 15 years went by without a 1 foot plus snowstorm in New York City. Okay, so that was one thing that struck me. And that remains, by the way, the longest period between snowstorms of 12 inches or more.
Wow.
So now, fast forward to now on March 7th, okay, culminates the end of this snowy period that began about 4 weeks, that lasted 4 weeks. 35.2 inches of snow fell in that time period, including 9.7 on February 13th, and then, of course, the 14 and a half for the March 1st and 2nd. That followed a 5 week period, January 6th through February 9th, that had just 1/10 of an inch of snow in that 5 week period.
So if you're
So,
talking about a backloaded winter, that's a backloaded winter.
oh yeah, I mean, we don't know there probably was some in December. I don't know if he mentions, he doesn't mention December in the going into December of 13. But yeah, I mean, this was very definitely a backloaded winter for sure. Now, I just forwarding ahead. Uh, I'm reading here in 1915, January 25th. It was the ninth day in a row of measurable precip. So guess what? You get into these damp and dreary periods that last for days and days at a time.
Right.
There's nothing new here. It was also the 12th day in the past in 2 weeks, and precip for that 12-day period was 6.21. Just going forward, January 31st in 1915. This was the 15th day in the winter to have measurable snow, but it was the first to have an accumulation of an inch or more. Okay. Again, not unusual. And then there's this stretch here from January 12th through February 6th, 10.62 inches of precip, 19 days measurable precip. That's a lot of liquid, but only 8 inches of that was snow. The rest of it was all rain. 8 inches of total snowfall. So 8/10 of an inch if you want to just use 10 to 1. Um, and it would be the wettest winter on record until the winter of 78, 79. And by the way, the biggest snowfall of that quote winter occurred on Easter Saturday, April 3rd, 10 inches.
Right. That goes down. I remember I had the Daily News used to have a weather almanac, believe it or not. J. Henry Weber was the meteorologist who published it every year, and it was out during the 60s and 70s. I remember reading about that particular Easter. That turned out to be the snowiest Easter on record. For a lot of people remember, well, maybe not a lot, but some of you were a certain age may remember Easter Sunday in 1970, March 29th, 4 inches in Central Park and up to 12 inches out in the Hudson Valley. But what Joe just mentioned was an April Easter Sunday, which is weird in itself to get snow in April, but 10, what was it, Joe? 10 point something inches?
Something, yeah, 10 point something.
So that was the snowiest Easter on record, beating by far the Easter that we had in 1970 in terms of snowfall.
Right. Now, here's another stretch. January 27th, 28, 1916. Okay. The highs both those days, 69 and 66. And those records are still standing. And those temperatures came less than 2 weeks after back-to-back days where we had low temperatures in the single digits.
Right.
It was the fifth day in that on February 1st. So January 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, and February 1st, 5 out of those 6 days had highs in the 60s. After that, February 1st, the high at 60, it would be 8 weeks before the next day that you got to 60 degrees. And in that time span, in that 8 week period, 40 inches of snow fell. So another backloaded winter. And by the way, the snowfall went to March 22nd, had 2.9 inches. So that was, I think, probably the last. And it was the second, at the time, I guess it was the second snowiest March, 25.5 for the month after March of 1896, and the fifth coldest March on record. So again, another backloaded winter. And then, of course, looking at the period from December of 17, which was very cold and very snowy. December 29th, starting from December 28th and continuing through January 4th, record lows set on 7 of 8 days. All of them are still standing. And only on January 3rd, with a low of 0, did not set a record. So you had -6 on the 29th, -13 on the 30th, -7 on the 31st. He goes into January 2nd. He skips New Year's Day. Let's see. The ball drop, the temperature was 1 degree above 0. And of course, we said was the second coldest 2 years ago was when it was 9 above when the ball went down.
Right.
And at 4 p.m., January 2nd, the temperature reached 10 degrees, ending a streak of 114 hours in which the temperature was single digits or less. But then it fell back to the single digits 1 hour later. January 4th, the 8th day of low temperatures in the single digits or colder. the lowest streak on record. The average high low in that streak was 13. The low average was -3. 6 of the days had lows of 0 or colder, including today. And one of the things that I noticed when I'll bring the map up, and I've got Joe has the link to this site. He sent it to me. I have it somewhere in my bookmarks, but I couldn't. I was a little lazy. I didn't want to look for it. But the hang on, I got to get my window open up here. Hang on one second. Okay, so that is window number 1, I believe.
I wonder also.
There we go.
I wonder if Scott can find out for us the last time the temperature, the low temperature, the minimum temperature at Central Park, or maybe, well, maybe not a record. It might not have been a record. Well, then maybe it might have been. The last time we had temperatures in double digits below 0.
Well, it's got probably 19. I'm going to say 1934.
Well, 34 was -15. That was the old
Right.
time record. But maybe like in the late 30s or even early 40s, we were still seeing those kind of temperature readings.
That's possible.
There like now, when we get an extremely cold day in New York, I mean, it may get down that low in the suburban locations, but in the city, it never seems to get much lower than -2 or -3 at most.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the setup at the upper air, though, Joe, it's not what you might think it is, because you've got a polar vortex that's sitting pretty far north up in Hudson Bay, and it's tilted northeast southwest. I got the map up on the screen. There's a 1039 high in Quebec, but you've got northeast isobars that run from Labrador right down through coastal New England to New York, all the way down into the southeast U.S. with a low out offshore. But it's a northeast flow. I mean, when we've seen these cold Arctic air masses over the years, we haven't really seen a setup like this, where you get the high pinned up in eastern Canada. This is how you get the coldest air. I think when we got to, we had one stretch of really cold weather in the last 5 years or so that kind of set up like this to a certain extent. But when you look at these maps going, I'm going to just jump over to the 31st and December 31st of 17. I mean, you still have this really strong high in Quebec. There's a low well southeast of Nova Scotia and this long northeast fetch. But if you were to look at the upper air in terms of the 500, it's not that cold. The 500 itself is not especially cold. It's all down at the low levels being dictated by the high. So I know Johnny Quest has asked me. I mean, this is an example where you look at a jet stream aloft, where the temperatures aloft they're cold, but they're not that cold. But it's really down at the bottom of the atmosphere that you're seeing. You see where the real cold air is. And this carried through. I'll just jump just 2 days. We'll go to January 2nd of 18. Let me just set this up. 7, 18.
And actually, I should point out that this is what, as you see at the bottom of the screen, this is a reanalysis. If you look back at the actual weather maps, you won't see this.
No.
The maps that were available back then, you would see a paucity of data and probably a very few isobars. But what they did was, I guess they fed this into a computer or have some sort of a computer model that can actually take what little data there was and
figure it out.
An algorithm, so to speak, to produce these maps.
Well, it's probably close. And then I just jumped to January 2nd, and you've got another Arctic high building, and it almost, getting ready to set it up in the same way. And I'll just jump to the 3rd. Yeah, I mean, if you go back, then you go to January 3rd. It's the same thing. You got this long fetch isobars, running from eastern Canada straight down the coast all the way to northern Florida, with the high over Lake Huron. The origins here really, it's not like we get these big highs that come down from northwest Canada and plunge southeastward into the mid-Atlantic states, where you get the really cold air. The coldest of the cold air goes down actually to the south, where they see temperatures down near 0 in some places or even below 0, and yet we're above 0 because of the wind direction being more northwest or west-northwest.
Right. The northwesterly wind would actually take that very cold air across Hudson Bay and also maybe across parts of the Great Lakes. And yeah, it's cold up there, but those large bodies of water actually will help to, however slight or however low it will be, modify that very cold air so that by the time it gets to us, it really does not pack the same frigidity as it did, let's say, when it was, let's say, north of Sault Ste. Marie or, coming on down through the Hudson Bay region.
You are correct. So for those for the snow weenies on board, it's January 3rd. We got a long way to go. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things, a couple of things I noted today that were sort of interesting to me. I just put up the 500 millibar, North America view, and of course, starting with tonight, where we still have this really, it's just a mess in terms of the whole upper flow, because the polar vortex is still just completely separated from uh, from the rest of the jet stream. So all the cold air is still pinned up in the Arctic regions. When I say cold air, I mean Arctic air. Okay, there is colder Canadian air, but uh, the flow across Canada is pretty much westerly. So it's not all that cold. And this is part of the problem, that you've got this vortex that's just basically up in its own world up there, and it's not connected to the rest of the flow. Now, we're going to be stuck with this for a while, but one of the things I noticed, Joe, going through the period, is that vortex tries to, gradually gets kicked eastward over Greenland, and it seems on this run. And by the way, the Canadian ensemble uh, it was started to show this today, that late in the forecast period, after about the 16th or the 17th, the upper air does undergo a bit of a change. It looks like the trough along the west coast starts to push more inland. And when we get to the end of the forecast period, there's a little bit more of a flow coming from northwest Canada into southeast Canada. So, if this is right, it says that at least through mid-month we're going to be dealing with the same nonsense that we're dealing now, and that means that unless something times out perfectly with what little cold air is around, there's not going to be a lot to be paying attention to. Although we'll take a look at next Tuesday in a second, but um, perhaps there could be something more significant in terms of changes as we get toward maybe the last 10 days of January, heading in toward the end of January, beginning of February. We talked about that last night. The climate models were showing that. They're still showing that today. So let's see where this takes us. But, there's a few glimmers in there in the longer term for the snow lovers that all may not be lost.
True, true. So right now, if you're a snow lover, just consider. Well, again, we're going to touch upon tomorrow night and next week, but after next Tuesday, Wednesday, just consider ourselves to be in a what I would call a winter mission or a winterlude for a little while before things start to perhaps crank back up in your favor toward the end of the month.
All right, so let's look at tomorrow. Sorry about that. Let me just get this to the first. I got the upper air. So again, it's this westerly, basically everything's moving primarily west to east. There's no Canadian connection. There's a sharp looking trough that comes through here tomorrow night. But again, it's do-it-yourself cold air, and I just don't see much coming of this. The trough is not, it actually sort of looks better tonight into tomorrow morning when it's moving through the Ohio Valley, and then it looks like it kind of weakens a bit as it heads towards the coast before it strengthens again when it heads off to the Gulf of Maine and Nova Scotia. And there's another trough that's swinging through the northern plains and upper Midwest. I actually threw in the chance that there could be a few snow showers Sunday night with that upper trough when it goes by.
Yeah, I would believe that. Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
It's almost like a excuse me. It's almost like a little digging shortwave that's coming on through. In fact, you can see on the upper air, it's kind of like a ripple, but it's a distinct ripple that's moving through New York State and Pennsylvania during Sunday night.
And by the way, if for those of you, if you're looking at the latest, looking at the latest GFS as far as even for places in upstate New York and New England, again, the lack of a cold high to the north here it's a low pressure map across Canada. There isn't even a weak high that you could work with. So the snow that's being produced is almost minimal on the GFS. There's a little bit more of it on the NAM, but in areas where it looked like it might be, a few inches up in upstate New York and up in northern New England, it might be a tough sell even up there in terms of the amount of precip that's going to be around. Yeah, I put in that there could be a few snow showers late Sunday night, early Monday morning. And then you've got this next low that is coming out. I'll put up the upper air with this. And we're going to go to the chat board tonight, so we'll take some questions, just letting everybody know. So, because they're all, a lot of times they're having their own conversations while we're talking, which is perfectly fine. But here's your trough for Tuesday. Sharpens up actually quite nicely as it moves east and cuts off when it gets into the Gulf of Maine. But the problem here is that it all happens too late. And as far as snow for the coast, I think this might be a bigger snow producer for Western PA, maybe down into northern West Virginia with on the backside, and then through upstate New York and into Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. That low does kind of strengthen as it moves along. And then, of course, you got the same story with another one that follows up toward the Great Lakes. Although I'm not, that one of the runs, Joe, had a 955 low up near James Bay.
Yeah.
Okay. And now it's a 993, just so you know.
It lost a little bit of strength.
Yeah. And I mean, this is another example at the end of next week into next Saturday. This is where, if you time it right, where cold air comes rushing in on the backside when the front goes by and you get a little wave on it, that you might see a change over to snow. That, I think, is probably the best you can expect for those of you who live in the I-95 corridor. And then after that, you're just going to have to be patient and wait until, late in this forecast period where it looks like it tries to get colder with a high building in and another one that follows, because the pattern in Canada gets a bit better, assuming it's real, which we don't know yet. But we'll see.
I'm just looking at the 4 to 7 day outlook on the WPC, the weather prediction page for our neck of the woods. And as far as Tuesday, they have a little bit of activity up near the Adirondacks. Wednesday, they have anywhere from 10 to 30% across a good part of the Northeast. There are some places in the higher terrain areas with 30 to 50% probability of maybe some snow. That pretty much is going away by Thursday, and by next Friday, there's nothing here in the Northeast.
Yeah, I have the 72-hour one up for you. So this takes us through the weekend. So I've got the map up for the probability of at least 2. And this takes you through 0Z Tuesday. So this is Monday night, 7 o'clock. So and you'll see where the southern edge of 5% is, folks. It's not even anywhere close to the coast. Where did these people? I know the answer to the question. As folks irresponsibly, in my view, trying to make a salesperson out of a sow's ear, I suppose, if you want to put it that way, but trying to make something when nothing was really there for their own personal agendas. Those are folks you should just ignore. By the way, but the probability of 2 inches or more in southwestern New York, parts of northeastern New York, northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire, northwest Maine, that's where you've got like 90% or higher. And if you want to use 50%, I just want to see what the highest amount is. Let's just jump into probability of 6. I mean, low probability of 6. There's a small little bubble of 50% east of Lake Ontario, so some of that's going to be lake effect anyhow. So you can see that the probability numbers for something other than minor for upstate New York and for New England, they're not really all that high in the next 72 hours.
Right. Yeah, and Joe, it seems like there's a better probability, but not for the immediate tri-state area, but a better probability maybe for some snow for that event, that shortwave or that little upper trough on Sunday night, Monday morning, as opposed to what we might see, let's say, tomorrow night late, or maybe even what we're going to see in the middle of next week.
Yeah, I mean that's a decent upper air trough. If this were a winter where snow was common, you probably would be thinking that somebody could wind up with a coating to maybe a half an inch or an inch out of it. But I certainly wouldn't forecast something like that in a winter like this, where so far where a lot of that stuff could wind up falling apart before it gets close enough to the coast. Inland spots might have a better chance for a few snow showers. It's something that lightens up the ground a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I'm now I was just looking at something on my map while you were talking or whatever, so I got a little taken away for a moment. Yeah, that's certainly a possibility again, especially as you head inland. Um, what more can I say? I mean, it's going to be a case where we'll just have to wait for that perfect scenario of cold and possible storminess, but it doesn't look like it's going to be coming our way in the immediate future. And CPC, Climate Prediction Center, I got to tell you, the 8 to 14 day outlook, and even the 6 to 10, has the 80% probability of above normal temperatures, not in our area, but not too far away to our south. I mean, how much more blowtorch can possibly it could get
Yeah.
from these outlooks coming
Scott
up?
Scott Briller posted he's got an answer to your question earlier. We were talking about the minuses. Um,
I knew he would. I knew he would come through.
yes, lowest temperature in New York City from 1950 to 2020. The coldest was net -2. I'm thinking that was December of the Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. What was it, 1980? That it got to
I,
-2.
yeah, no, in 1980, I remember a very sharp drop, and it was also a very cold Christmas in '83,
Yes,
-2. So, and
-2. I think that was December of '80.
we never have. So we have not seen anything lower than -2 in our lifetime. That's amazing.
Yeah. Um,
And then
lo-
some people who claim, oh, it's global warming, it's climate change. No, it's not. It's the drastic buildup of New York City and Manhattan with all of those tall buildings, the so-called heat island effect.
right.
That, for all intents and purposes, why we haven't seen those frigid temperatures that we used to see back in the 40s and 30s and earlier.
Yeah, but when
Uh,
you look at the when you look at the surface, when you look at the setup at the surface of the loft, I can I it's rare that we get a setup like that where we've got the cold high up in eastern Canada, really strong cold high in eastern Canada with a strong northeast fetch. Oftentimes for us the wind is northwest or west northwest. Maybe sometimes it's northwest, but it's not often that you get that northeast wind coming
right.
down, because that wind does not warm. There's no
Correct.
subsidence, there's no, it just comes straight down the Hudson Valley, and it's bitter air. But I just wonder whether we've just gone through a long cycle where we just haven't really seen setups that are prone to produce um, uh, bitter cold like that. Because if you look at the upper air for it, the upper air is nothing special. It's not like some big polar vortex came down with really low heights, really low heights coming into upstate New York, or maybe even down up into maybe even further south than that. It's all about the surface high. So I don't know. I just don't remember too many setups like that.
Well, how about we're talking about now, cold air based on advection. How about a situation where we have a
By the way, let me just finish real fast. He says negative was only -2. The last time -8 was in 1943. So
okay.
that was the last time. If you want to go for a bigger number, -5 or more. So they got a -8 there in 1943.
Hmm. But how about a situation where we have a really deep snow cover? Let's say a massive storm drops a foot and a half of snow on us, and then like within 48 hours, the high comes directly overhead, and we go to dead calm.
Right.
I wonder if that kind of radiational situation, it's possible to drop that temperature in New York to lower than 2 below 0.
Well, here's something. So if we look, one of the things I think you have to also look in that equation in terms of the cold is just is the question of snow cover. And certainly we could take the 30 years from 1970 to 2000. If you look at those years, I guarantee you that most of the time that we saw some of the coldest air probably didn't come with very much snow cover on the ground. On the
Right.
other hand, you mentioned radiation. So Brookhaven Labs, the all-time record low at Brookhaven Labs is from January of '61. I think it was January 22nd or 23rd, 23 degrees below zero.
Right.
So
And that came on the heels of the famous Kennedy inauguration snow.
right, there was deep snow cover, and there were three 1 foot plus. Well, for Central Park anyway, the snowfall for that was I think 9.9 inches. But there was
Right.
a big snowstorm in December of '60, a big snowstorm in February of '61, and there was, we'll call that a big snowstorm for January of '61. So there was deep snow cover on the ground. I wonder, when you look deeper, if you look at the numbers, um, how much snow cover, how many times have we seen setups with big highs in the right spot with that northeast fetch and some snow cover? Maybe that's what was missing. Maybe that's what's been missing these last 70 or so years. When we've gotten these below zero temperatures, they haven't really come with that sort of setup.
But I wonder if that could happen again if the same setup, the same kind of storm, and the same kind of radiational cooling effect a few days later, because Long Island has built up tremendously since 1961. I mean, there back then, the eastern half of Long Island, much of Suffolk County, was
Right.
just wide open with
Well,
potato fields.
sure, but east of me, I mean, literally just east of me, east of MacArthur Airport, when you go past exit 63 or 4, it's mostly pine barrens out there. It's still, that long stretch. What is developed is all, there's no buildings. It's all, there's a few patches that are industrial, some industrial complexes, but the buildings are few and far between, mainly 3 or 4 stories or less, and the rest of it's all pine barrens. I mean, West Hampton Beach, I think since I've lived out here, uh, I think they've gotten once down to about 18 or 20 below.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think below zero out here in the wintertime with radiation is still rather common. It's nowhere. I wouldn't know, certainly not describe it as urbanized. Now you start to go, for west of me, and you go into Nassau County, then that's a different story.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right because many times we have seen even on summer or spring nights, you'll get like Poughkeepsie is like give you a case in point. Poughkeepsie might drop to like 45 degrees. The same night out at West Hampton Beach, the temperatures are down near freezing. It's
Yeah.
crazy. They seem to be like they have the model for the classic radiational cooling situation right there on the eastern end of Long Island. And you remember our old friend Don Thompson, who lived out in Noyak,
Right.
always constantly complaining about the fact that the Weather Service never, ever hit. This is when they were at Rockefeller Center, would never hit the correct low temperature out there. It was always, temperatures near the shore were always expected to be warmer, and Long Island was near the shore. And yet, Don would say, my goodness, it got down to, you know, the 25 or 30 while everybody else was
Yeah.
near 50 last
It's a
night.
whole different world out here. South
Yep.
Jersey's the same way. You get the pine barrens down in South Jersey. When there's snow cover down there, it gets brutally cold.
Right.
The thermometer at Tom's River. I don't know exactly where that thermometer is, but they get some really off the wall radiational cooling down there. Bobby Livingsworth makes a very good point. Even 100 years is considered a small sample, and I think I think that's quite valid. We've got 100 or so years of data.
Right.
Central Park goes back more, it's 100 140, I'm sorry, 150 years. But yeah, that's small. You probably need, if you really want to get some solid data, you need a good 500 years, I think. That would really be. So we'll have to stick around and wait another 300 or so years before we could really come to, a conclusion. And by the way, Scott pointing out the last time it was below zero was February 14th of 2016. And I remember February 14th of Valentine's Day 2016, -1. I remember forecasting that it was going to bottom below zero in New York City that day. And I got into a fierce argument with someone on Facebook who I have since subsequently blocked. for a number of reasons. And I did it on his birthday too. So the thing is, he was just telling me how below zero was never going to happen again in New York City, yada, yada, yada. And we had snow, I believe, if I remember correctly, we had some snow cover on the ground. And that was on President's Day weekend. And I had gone up to New Hampshire. I've told you the story about it was 15 below with a,
Right.
with a wind chill down at around minus 40. And I don't care what anybody says. There's a huge difference between, you know, being out there when it's zero and being out there when it's 15 below, and comparing the actual air temperature of 15 below with a wind chill of 15 below, there's no comparison. 15
No.
below zero is brutal. It hurts to stay outside. But that was the last time New York City went below zero. So it happened only it'll be 4 years since the last time we've been below zero. So it still can happen.
Well, that's good.
AAA says the weather changes more than his underwear.
Well,
Well,
that's
I would just be
changing.
I would just be careful saying that in the pattern that we're stuck in, okay? Because then, from the broadest sense,
Yeah.
it's not changing for a while.
Uh,
Let's see. Am I going to
fire me on my birthday?
Elizabeth? Why would I fire you on your birthday? I wouldn't fire you at all. You're one of the nicest people on the board. Michael Azera, what about the insane cold of January 17th, 1982, when the afternoon high hovered near zero across central New Jersey?
I remember that. Yeah, that's another one. That made it into David Ludlum's Great American Weather Book, and I remember that. Was that a Sunday? I think it was a Sunday,
Yeah,
January 17th, 1982.
one of
I
those rare days that you actually did freeze in place.
yeah.
Ashley R says, I've been interested in meteorology for about a year. I know quite a bit about hurricanes and radar, but not climo. Ashley, there's climo all over the place, and I don't know where you are, but if you go to your local National Weather Service page, your local weather service page, and just click on past weather, and if you're in the New York, if you're in New York's zone, or even if you're not, take a look at New York's, because they have so much climo stuff in there. The New York, the Upton office has really done a great job in compiling a lot of weather data in their Climo site that's available. And of course, you could Google around on the internet and you can find other stuff. But start with your weather service page with your local office. Johnny Quest, how much snow does the Empire State Building get compared to street level? That's a pretty good question up at 1,000 feet, because
Well, the dry adiabatic would be what, 3.5 degrees for every 1,000 feet up you go, colder.
yes.
So, that is a good question.
Well, I mean, I remember when I worked at Pick, so we had the camera up on the Citicorp Tower, which went up, goes up 40 floors, or even on the top of the building at 220 East 42nd Street, which is, I think there's 20 or 20, whatever, how many flights there are. But it wasn't uncommon to look at the Citicorp Tower and see it, heavy snow falling at that height, and then having it be rain right on the ground, and none of the flakes making it. They all would melt on the way down.
I lost my high school graduation ring on the Empire State Building in a snowbank, and it was returned to me when the spring snow when the snow finally melted in the spring. Somebody found it. Thank goodness I put my name on the inside. I had the name my name inscribed on the inside of the ring, and people were a lot more honest then, back in the 70s, I think. And somebody found it, returned it to the Empire State Building front desk. They contacted my school. My school contacted me and said, "Hey, they got your ring at the Empire State Building." I was up there in January of 1974 with a bunch of guys. We had our telescopes up there. We were looking for the ill-fated comet Kohoutek, which was supposed to be the comet of the century, but it turned out to be the dud of the century. And in the midst of everything, I guess my ring slipped off into a snowbank on the Empire State Building's 86th floor observation deck. And it wasn't until like 3 months later that somebody found it
Yeah.
and returned it to me.
Chuck Cardillo harks back to the winter of 13-14 in the Western Catskills, when you had many nights down in minus 20 to minus 30. Boy, that's tough. And that's probably the best example of a winter that was unrelenting from start to finish. But those are rare. If if you get one thing out of that website, I'll put the link up again on the chat board. It's the name is too long to read, but I'll put the link up here. And he's got the decades from going back up to about 1960. But the one thing that that you'll find, as you read through these general weather summaries, is that there's nothing new in the weather pattern that we're having here. Nothing new. So just bear that in mind. Joe, you might know the answer to this. Is Daniel Fitzsimmons? How can I look up data for Poughkeepsie and Toms River? I don't know who keeps the Toms River data, or if anybody really does. What about Poughkeepsie?
It used to be that the folks in Boston used to have a site, 188 different climate sites, and they included Poughkeepsie, not New Jersey. Toms River, New Jersey was not on that list, but Poughkeepsie and White Plains, and all of a sudden that went away. And I asked a couple of years ago Jeff Tung of the National Weather Service over at Upton where I could find these records. He gave me a site, I think through the Weather Underground, but now that's gone. It's very, very difficult to find
Yeah,
climatological information.
you might have to go to Asheville to the
Yeah.
National Climactic Center. It's going to cost you, but unless you want something unofficial. Christina Pedia says that she found a high school ring in 2001, in 2001. I found her on class. She found this person on Classmates and mailed it to her. They've been online friends ever since. That's pretty cool. And David Schwartz brings up something that is incredibly relevant, Joe. He says, Twilight Zone trivia. Russell Johnson appeared on a few episodes in a role just titled as the Professor. This was, of course, a few years before he was the professor on
Before
Gilligan's
he
Island.
became the professor on Gilligan's Island, there was an episode of the Twilight Zone where he was called just the professor.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember seeing Russell Johnson in a Twilight Zone episode. I don't particularly remember specifically, but I do remember seeing him on a Twilight Zone episode.
The one Twilight Zone episode I remember Russell Johnson on was an episode where he was having a discussion with people. It was Washington D.C. and they were talking about going back in time or whatever. And all of a sudden he wakes up and suddenly he's back in 1865 on the day that Lincoln was assassinated. And he's trying to get people to be convinced that Lincoln is going to be assassinated. Unfortunately, one of the people he tells that to is John
Wilkes Booth. Colin wants to know: is it me or does Mount Holly NWS stink? Now, Colin, we love our friends at the Weather Service. Okay, we really do. I mean, I as a whole, I think and I've said this many times in terms of what they have made available publicly. Just go look at some of the websites from nations on the other side of the Atlantic, and you will find so little information that's made available publicly. Our Weather Service, there's so many things on there, so many tools, so much data that's out there and available for free, thankfully, because we can't live without it. Joe Maiano, thanks for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Jeff Gray says, does this link work for what you guys were talking about? They have climate info. I'm sorry, the link I put up, the link I put up kind of breaks it down, what went on, the highlights of the year, just kind of has that, written in paragraphs, okay? And as I read out, but you could go to, if you're in the New York area, if you want to use the Upton site, take a look at that. Oh, great Climo site, by the way, from the Weather Service, is the Weather Service office in Gray, Maine. They got some really cool snow stuff up there. Yeah, Gray, Maine's got, of course, snow to them is just so ordinary. But Gray, Maine has a lot of good stuff. But take a look at that, Jeff Gray. Depends on what you're looking for. But I'm kind of just again, which link if you're referring to the link that I put up, that was that's going to give you a general summary with regards to the decades. And it only has on there through the 1960s. Emily Behans is at a birthday tomorrow, so happy birthday to Emily. The one I posted just below my comment. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me take a look. Okay, so it says, does this link work for what you guys are talking about? And I'm just trying to find the link now. And hang on. I'm going to scroll back, Jeff. I see my link. Oh, you know what, Jeff? I just realized I can put links up because it's my live stream. But you can. If you put the link up, it won't come up on my. No one else can see it. So I don't see the link that you're referring to. So you know what you can do? You can message me on Facebook or on Twitter, and or even email me if you'd like, and I'll take a look at it. Ryan Hastava, it's been 2 years now, I believe, since we've had a classic cold, blowing snow kind of storm down in New York City. Since then, it's been mostly wet snow with marginal temperatures. You really do have to, well, yeah, you really do have to go back. One of the things I liked about the winters of 13, 14, and 14, 15 is that for the vast majority of those events, you didn't really have to worry about a rain snow line because it was so cold. We had so many storms in those 2 winters where temperatures were in the teens. In fact, it was really unusual to have snowfall with temperatures even in the 20s in those 2 winters. I really enjoyed that, the very dry, powdery snows. But you're right, the vast majority of the ones since then have been with warmer temperatures because we haven't really had that sort of setup like we had in 13, 14, and 14, 15. I think Joe would agree with me on that point.
Yes, I would.
All right.
I'm just trying to pull up some maps here on my screen, and that's why people
Sure.
may think I'm falling asleep because I'm looking down here.
Tim on the board. Pivotalweather.com they got some really good maps. So for those of you who want to look at weather models, particularly the European, because they do have since the European released their copyright, they are now you can see the snow maps everywhere, and you can post them as long as you give credit to where credit is due with regards to Pivotal Weather. So you can take a look at it. That's pivotalweather.com. Very, very good. And let's see. The last hardcore winter was 14-15. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, at least for the East. But those hardcore winters are rare. 60-61 was a hardcore winter. You have a few of them peppered through the 60s. And those are rare. Those are rare type of winters. 77, 78, I think, or 76, 77 as well. You might call that, hardcore in terms of cold. 77, 78. Fair amount of cold and stormy with respect to temperatures. And of course the blizzard of 78 and the January 19th storm. But the January 19th storm came with borderline temps. Yeah, 13, 14, 14, 15 were really like hardcore winter years. So, what are you doing this weekend?
Probably just sitting here and typing. I do a lot of freelance writing and articles for various venues, so I may just take advantage of that. And since it's not going to be all that great tomorrow weather-wise, and it's going to be windy and cold, and on Sunday, I'll just stay in here, my
Yeah.
man cave, as my wife calls it.
Sounds like a plan.
Yep.
Just let's before we go. Next Tuesday is David McCain's birthday. He'll be 17 as he waits for something to happen in Youngstown, Ohio, because the weather's been rather boring. Hasn't gotten much snow. Hasn't gotten much thunderstorm activity. He's always asking for one extreme or the other. But happy birthday to you. And that's it. Yeah, I've got nothing planned for this weekend. Maybe watch a little playoff football if the mood strikes me. But other than that, I really don't have anything.
That's right.
Anything of.
Will the Patriots be knocked out tomorrow night?
Well, we can only hope and pray, right? All right. So no live stream tomorrow night. Sunday morning. Sound good to you?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
I'm not,
So we'll go what a little after 10:30. Let's say 10:45.
or thereabouts. Yeah.
All right, great. This way you can watch your CBS Sunday morning and from start to finish.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, it's my
Very,
pleasure.
very considerate of you.
All right, so that's it. Coffee with Chaffee. That'll be Sunday at 10:45 Eastern time. So stick around for that. We will not be live streaming tomorrow since there really isn't too much going on. I'm not going to live stream for 5 drops of rain and 6 snowflakes. So we'll just leave it at that. I'll get a nice deserved day off, and we will see you on Sunday. So, oh, by the way, really quick. Those of you that have the free weather, my free weather app, the meteorologist Joe Chaffee weather app, I added the radars for Albany, the radar out of Boston, and the radar out of Gray, Maine. So this way, if you want to see where it's snowing, where it's snowing, you can at least see it there, since it may not be snowing necessarily where you are. And those radars, I put them right underneath the snow forecast maps for that zone. So if you scroll down on the home screen on the app, you'll see those radars are up, and those are close to real time that the Weather Service puts out in GIF form. And so every time you refresh it, you'll wind up getting a new image. And of course, if you use the zoom radar feature, you can just go right in. You can move it around to wherever you want, get as tight as you want, put temperatures, wind, and so on. And those are free apps. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Just search Google Play or the App Store. Okay, so that finishes up the first days of. This is not quite the first week of January.
3 days in, Joe.
It is, and
So
my God, the year is flying already.
it's amazing, isn't it?
It
And it's a
is.
leap year too.
Oh, so we get an extra whole day.
That's right.
All right, so all right, so for the winter is over, crowd. It ain't over till it's over. Just remember that. All right, so go read that Climo thing I posted the link for, and make a point of realizing the fact that there's nothing new here. So in whatever we're seeing in terms of the weather pattern that's going on, there's nothing that much different than what happened over 100 years ago. All right, have a great night and a great weekend, and we'll see you on Sunday morning.
See you later.